For 2,000 years, the Phoenicians have been described in every textbook, every museum placard, and every documentary as a Canaanite people. Seafarers, who emerge naturally from the Lebanese coast, the way salt crystallizes from seawater, inevitable, local, rooted, their purple dye, their merchant ships, their alphabet, the one that gave rise to Greek, Latin, and ultimately every letter you're reading right now. All of it, the story said, springing from a single coastal strip no wider than a modern highway corridor, shaped by Bronze Age Canaan, continuous and unbroken. The consensus held for generations. Textbooks said so. Scholars agreed. The case felt closed. The DNA evidence says otherwise. What geneticists have now sequenced from ancient Phoenician skeletal remains, pulled from burial sites stretching from modern Lebanon to Sardinia to the coast of Tunisia, doesn't match the tidy picture, not even close. The lineage is older than Canaan, the ancestry more fragmented, the origin story more complicated, more violent, and more fascinating than anyone expected. And buried inside it is a ghost population, a vanished people whose genetic fingerprint appears in the Phoenicians' genome, but whose civilization left almost nothing behind. This is not a minor revision. This is a rewrite. The archaeological case for a Canaanite origin was, for most of the 20th century, genuinely airtight, or appeared to be. Excavations at Byblos, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities on Earth, had uncovered Phoenician cultural layers stretching back to at least 3000 BCE. The material culture was unmistakably local. The distinctive Canaanite pottery style, the ivory carvings, the bronze figurines. Linguists had long classified Phoenician as a Northwest Semitic language, closely related to Hebrew, and Aramaic, rooted firmly in the Levantine soil. Everything pointed in the same direction. The established narrative went like this. Sometime around 1200 BCE, the Bronze Age collapsed. Civilizations across the eastern Mediterranean, the Hittites, the Mycenaeans, the Ugarit kingdom, shattered under a combination of drought, migration, and systems failure that historians still debate. But the Canaanite coastal cities survived. They pivoted. They became Phoenicia. From Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, they launched a maritime empire that would reach Spain, North Africa, and possibly beyond. Traders, colonizers, alphabet bearers. The consensus was clear. They were a Canaanite people who outlasted the Bronze Age collapse and remade the ancient world. Physical archaeology supported it. The continuity of pottery styles across the transition period. The unbroken religious iconography. The same gods, the same burial rites, the same urban planning. Archaeologists followed the artifacts from site to site and saw an unbroken thread. It was a tidy explanation, logical, supported by centuries of accumulated excavation data. The textbook version seemed bulletproof. But there was a problem. Nobody had checked the DNA. Then, in 2020, a team led by geneticist Mark Haber at the Wellcome Sanger Institute in Cambridge published findings that began dismantling the whole thing. Quietly at first, the paper appeared in the American Journal of Human Genetics, and outside specialist circles it barely registered. But inside the field of ancient genomics, it landed like a disruption charge detonated beneath a foundation everyone assumed was solid. The challenge Haber's team faced was staggering. Ancient DNA degrades in hot, dry climates, and the Levant qualifies. The biological machinery of genetic material breaks down within centuries, sometimes decades. What remains is fragmented, contaminated, chemically altered. Extracting usable sequences from a 2,800-year-old Phoenician tooth is, as Haber himself described it, like trying to read a library after someone has run it through a shredder and then left the pieces in a furnace for 3 millennia. The team worked with samples no larger than a grain of table salt, drilling into dense cortical bone, and dental pulp to find pockets where endogenous DNA, the original biological material, not later contamination, had been sealed from the environment. They sequenced 5 ancient individuals from the Phoenician colony of Carthage in modern Tunisia, cross-referencing them against a database of 1,269 ancient and modern genomes. They added to this analysis published data from Phoenician-era burials in Lebanon, Sardinia, and Spain. What they were building was a genomic portrait of an entire civilization assembled from fragments. The autosomal data, the broad genome-wide ancestry patterns, not just the maternal mitochondrial line, showed something unexpected. The Phoenicians were not simply Canaanites with Mediterranean tan. Their ancestry was layered, stratified, a complex admixture that drew from sources older than the Bronze Age, deeper than the Levant, and in at least one case, from a population that has no clear modern equivalent. The haplogroup distributions, the branching family trees of mitochondrial lineages, past mother to child without recombination across thousands of years, pointed to ancestry streams that didn't align with the archaeological picture. Then, the ghost population emerged. Based on the archaeological record, geneticists expected to find ancestry dominated by Levantine Neolithic farmers, the people who had inhabited the eastern Mediterranean coast since around 8,000. BCE, who built the first settled communities, who began the long process of cultural continuity that conventional archaeology described, they are present, yes, but they share genomic space with something else, something older, a lineage that doesn't match any known ancient population with a name. Instead, they found a deep Anatolian Neolithic component, ancestry from Western Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, that arrived in the Levant, not through the Bronze Age trade networks historians had mapped, but far earlier, far deeper, before writing, before cities, before Canaan existed as a concept. This was not background noise, not a trace, a substantial founding contribution to the Phoenician genome, one that predates their cultural origins by thousands of years. The Phoenicians weren't simply the children of Canaan. They were, in part, the biological inheritors of a migration event so ancient it left no monument, no archive, no name, only a molecular echo, locked in tooth enamel, waiting 3,000 years to be read. And there is a second disruption embedded in the data. The Sardinian Phoenicians, colonists from Tyre and Sidon who founded settlements on the island beginning around 900 BCE, show a genomic signature partially distinct from their Lebanese contemporaries. Not from Canaan, not primarily from the Levant at all. They carry ancestry pointing toward the central Mediterranean that predates the Phoenician colonial period, suggesting that the famous Phoenician expansion wasn't simply migration from a single origin point outward to empty coasts. In at least some cases, the colonizers mixed with local Neolithic populations, adopted their genetics, and became something new, a biological hybrid that the archaeological record, focused on pottery and inscriptions, entirely missed. Here's where it gets strange. The Phoenicians are famous for one thing above almost all others: their alphabet. 22 consonants, no vowels, the ancestor of Greek, Latin, Arabic, Hebrew, and dozens of other writing systems, the script that made mass literacy possible. And the irony embedded in this genomic story is almost too neat. The people who gave humanity the tool to write its own history left a genetic record that their own written sources entirely failed to describe. No Phoenician text records where they came from. No king list reaches back to a mythological homeland. The origin was either forgotten, suppressed, or simply never known. The DNA is the only autobiography they left. Dr. Claude Dumais-Serhal, an archaeologist who has spent decades excavating Sidon, has noted that the Phoenicians seem to deliberately construct their identity around trade and cultural exchange rather than ethnic origin claims. It fits the genomic picture. A people assembled from multiple ancestry streams operating across the entire Mediterranean basin had little use for a singular origin myth. Their identity was their network, not their blood. A follow-up study published in 2023 in PLOS Genetics by researcher Iosif Lazaridis at Harvard Medical School, analyzing a broader dataset of 178 ancient Levantine genomes spanning 8,000 years, confirmed and extended Haber's findings. The deep Anatolian ancestry component is real, robust, and present in populations across the Bronze Age Levant, including those who would eventually become Phoenician. The admixture event appears to have occurred during the Chalcolithic period, roughly 4,500 to 3,500 BCE, a window of time that produced no surviving written record anywhere in the region. It was not Phoenician migration. It was the ancestral substrate on which Phoenician civilization was eventually built, thousands of years later, by people who had no idea it was there. 50 meters of occupied soil in a Beirut excavation trench, 0.3 milligrams of ancient dental pulp. One contains everything archaeology ever recovered about the Phoenicians: artifacts, inscriptions, trade goods, religious objects. The other contains information none of it could provide. The implications radiate outward. Across the modern Mediterranean, populations that descend in part from Phoenician colonization, Maltese, Sardinians, coastal Tunisians, Lebanese Maronites, carry this layered ancestry inside them. The Maltese population shows among the highest rates of Y chromosome haplogroup J2, associated with ancient Near Eastern populations and carried in part by Phoenician traders and settlers. The Sardinians carry an ancient genomic layer that reflects both their pre-Phoenician Neolithic heritage and the colonial admixture that followed. Every one of these modern people is, in some measurable molecular sense, a living archive of the migration events that built and rebuilt the ancient Mediterranean world. The Anatolian ghost population that contributed to Phoenician ancestry, those nameless farmers or herders or wanderers who crossed into the Levant 4,000 to 5,000 years before Christ and merged with local populations, has no monument, no inscription, no legendary founder, no city named after them. We carry pieces of these people in our cells, passed down through 150 generations without anyone knowing they existed. The written record erased them. The biology preserved them. This also forces a reconsideration of how we think about ancient civilizations generally. The Phoenicians were not unusual in having layered, complicated ancestry. They were unusual only in being studied. The picture emerging from ancient DNA across the world is consistent, Virtually every civilization we think of as bounded, coherent, and ethnically unified was in reality a biological patchwork, assembled from migrations, admixtures, and population encounters that left no written trace. The Neolithic farmers who became Bronze Age Canaanites, who became Iron Age Phoenicians, were themselves the product of earlier arrivals, earlier mixings, earlier ghost populations. The line between cultures, which archaeology draws with pottery styles and burial rites, does not exist in the genome. It never did. And this is perhaps the most unsettling thing the Phoenician data reveals. Not about them, but about us, and about the stories we tell. We have always built civilizations on origin myths, clean beginnings, chosen peoples, indigenous roots. The DNA refuses these stories. Every population is a composite. Every culture is a palimpsest. Every person alive today is the improbable biological endpoint of a migration chain that stretches back 200,000 years across a continent none of their named ancestors ever called home. Somewhere in the basement storage of the National Museum of Beirut, a building that has survived wars, explosions, and decades of neglect, lie bone fragments from Sidon and Tyre that are still being analyzed. They hold answers to questions we haven't yet thought to ask. But they also raise new ones. If the Phoenicians carried ancestry from a pre-Bronze Age migration event that predates Canaan itself, what does that mean for the other civilizations that share that substrate? What does it mean for the origin of the alphabet, the cultural product we most associate with this people? Did the Anatolian ancestry bring anything beyond biology? A way of thinking, a system of marks, a protoscript that eventually became the 22 consonants that made Western literacy possible? The data suggests, though doesn't confirm, that the story has deeper roots than the coast of Lebanon. You can erase a name from stone. You cannot erase it from cells. The Phoenicians built no pyramids, left no colossal statuary, constructed no monuments that survived the millennia in their name. What they left was an alphabet, and it turns out, a genome. Both have outlasted everything else. Both are still being read. The story of the Phoenicians is not finished. It is only beginning. As sequencing technology improves and access to ancient skeletal material expands, particularly from understudied sites in North Africa, the Iberian Peninsula, and the eastern Mediterranean coast, we will keep rewriting the chapters. There are thousands of stories like this one sitting in museum drawers and laboratory freezers, waiting to be told. Subscribe to stay updated as we uncover them.